high school classroom in Texas is being used as a prayer room, and it's stirring up controversy. Some fear Muslim students are getting preferential treatment. So does it raise legal concerns? Time now for a fair and balanced debate. Mustafa Tamiz is a Democratic strategist and a former consultant for the Department of Homeland Security. And Pastor Robert Jeffress is a Fox News contributor and the senior pastor at the First Baptist Church in Dallas. He joins us from Jerusalem this morning. Thank you both for joining us. So let me go first to you, Mustafa. So you've got apparently the mosque was too far away. The students requested a space inside the public school to pray, and the school afforded it. What do you think of that decision?
Well, it's a non-denominational prayer room, and that exists everywhere across the United States. Big employers provide it. In the airports, we have a chapel where people can go pray. So it's not necessarily just for Muslim students. It's for anybody of faith that wants to use a room to communicate with their Creator. So I think this is just hyperbolic in trying to make it about Muslim and creating a controversy where one doesn't really exist.
So, Pastor, I've got to go to you. So the district says that students of all faiths can use it, but it's used almost exclusively and mostly by Muslims. For 30 minutes a day at 2 o'clock, the room is available at this high school. Is this just religious liberty, or do you feel like there's a double standard? Do you feel like Muslim students are afforded here an opportunity in public schools where Christians long ago were not?
I'm going to surprise you by my answer. I believe that as long as students have equal access to this room, it's not a First Amendment issue. And I think we really, as conservatives, need to be careful that we don't pervert the First Amendment like liberals do to use it for their own agenda. I mean, the First Amendment simply says that Congress cannot establish a state church and coerce people to worship in it. It has nothing to say about nativity scenes, Ten Commandment displays, or prayer rooms in the public schools. And the liberal judges have used the First Amendment to try to ban all religious expression. Conservatives should have no part of that whatsoever.
Pastor, before I go back to Mustafa, I've got to press you on that, because of course it's freedom of religion. But for Christians, the Bible, prayer, any activity during school time or school resources, the Ten Commandments, crosses, anything, they've been pushed out of the public square and out of public schools for years. So don't you feel like this is a double standard? They're opening the door to Muslim students when Christians have been pushed out.
Well, I agree with you wholeheartedly that Christians have been pushed out by an absolute perversion of the First Amendment. But we as Christians don't have to push down somebody else's religion. We need to fight for the religious liberty of all Christians. And by the way, that's why I'm so grateful that we have a president like Donald Trump who is going to appoint judges and justices who interpret the law according to what the Constitution actually says and not according to what liberals wish it said.
Elle magazine has published accounts of 4 transgender citizens living in Trump's America. The quickly shifting political landscape has become frightening for many of the country's most vulnerable people. Kay Richardson, a gender non-binary person of color, said of the experience, "I'm afraid of getting attacked. I'm afraid of cisgender men who stare at me to the point of being uncomfortable. I'm afraid I won't be able to afford the things I need to live my life authentically." Consistent throughout each of the experiences was a feeling of uncertainty and intense anxiety.
The Huaycoloro, one of Lima's main rivers and one of dozens overflowed in Peru's coast. The strong current swiped through areas of Huachipa, 15 kilometers east of Lima, leaving devastation in its course. Esther Yactarimay lives by the river. She says the landslide and flooding took all families in the area by surprise.
We felt as if it was an earthquake. We went out and saw the mud coming. As you can see, everything has been lost.
The mud and water flooded streets and homes. Thousands were left without electricity and water. People are still desperate.
The mud didn't reach our homes, but we can't leave. Exits have been cut off. We are isolated here, without water. How are we going to cook?
The government says more than half of the country is in state of emergency. 70,000 people have lost their homes and 500,000 have been affected. Roads are destroyed, bridges collapsed, and crops lost.
This is a path of landslides. The government is asking people to stay away from riverbanks like this, but people need to cross to look for food and water.
On Saturday, people queued up as the government began distributing basic food and water. Private citizens started support networks to deliver clothes and food. The government set up tents for some of those who lost their homes. Most of the flood victims are poor. The Minister of Culture says he hasn't seen this scale of the disaster in more than 30 years.
The situation is far more overwhelming than we could have imagined, and it's not over yet. It's very difficult, but we're getting better at responding.
Water has been cut off in several districts of Lima, a city of more than 9 million. The government is still assessing the level of disruption. Weather forecasts indicate there will be rain for another month as the worst downpours in decades continue to leave the country at a standstill. Mariana Sanchez, Al Jazeera, Huachipa, Peru.
Dawn aboard the Rainbow Warrior. Overnight, it took us into the Straits of Magellan, and now they are taking us and a Chilean TV crew to a flash protest against salmon farming in the waters of Patagonia. The activists are in the Zodiac that's ahead of us, and we know they're planning something, but they haven't told us yet what. Clearly, the structure you see in front of us is a salmon farm. What we don't know yet is whether it's been fully set up. We've been told to stay behind while the Greenpeace activists take a closer look. A boat is approaching the salmon farm now, apparently bringing food for the fish, and this is an indication that this farm is indeed operational. The sign reads, "Save the oceans of the end of the world." The purpose of this campaign is to prevent what Greenpeace calls an imminent environmental disaster. And the whole idea here is not only to draw public awareness, but also to pressure the Chilean government so that it won't authorize an additional 300 salmon farm licenses right here in these pristine waters. So the spokesperson for Chile's branch of Greenpeace is now coming over to talk to us. How can an action, a protest so simple as just holding up a sign in the middle of nowhere? We're the only ones that can see you. And our viewers will too, but is that enough?
Well, not enough if it's just me here. But our call is for thousands and millions of people can join to this campaign to save the seas at the end of the world. This area is supposed to be in the future one of the biggest national parks in the country. So now we are contaminating all future national parks. So it's crazy because in this seas lives the 36% of the diversity of marine mammals in the world. So this is a hotspot of marine mammals for the planet.
That's it for today. We're the only international news organization that's been invited to accompany Greenpeace on this campaign. And we're told there's going to be another more bold action sometime in the next 48 hours. But again, they are not telling us the details. That's being kept very close to their chest.
A wildfire near the University of Colorado in Boulder burned through about 62 acres of woodland on Sunday. The massive blaze prompted authorities to urge at least 1,000 people to evacuate the drought-hit region. The fire in Sunshine Canyon, which is just outside a university town, started before dawn on Sunday. It is now about 20% contained with no injuries or damages to structures reported, according to the Boulder Emergency Operations Center. A wide swath of northeastern Colorado is under a National Weather Service warning for wildfires.
A presidential welcome home for Mexicans deported under President Donald Trump. With the US leader promising many more will be heading back, the government here is, at least on camera, paying attention. But migrant support groups say that beyond that first contact, there's minimal support for those who are kicked out of the US without warning, often leaving everything behind. Like Diego Maria, a forklift operator forced to leave his son and job. He's now helping out in his sister's shop because despite his skills, he can't get work here.
It don't matter how much experience I have in the US, I don't have the chance over here to do anything because I don't have anything to prove. They want papers, they want young people over here.
The government helps deportees like Diego get Mexican ID and search for jobs. It also offers small grants for those in a position to set up businesses. But there's no specially allocated federal money and no shelters for those who arrive with nothing and nowhere to go. Officials say there's no need.
We don't think it's necessary to set up a fund for them because at the end of the day there are already government programs and money for Mexicans, and they are Mexicans, independently of the fact that they're deportees.
That's despite the government specially putting aside $50 million for consular protection for Mexicans stateside. NGOs say it's a mark of how US-based migrants are appreciated, especially while they're sending money back home, but can then be seen as an unwelcome burden by authorities and even their home communities when they're deported back here. US-based Mexicans sent back $27 billion last year, money that helps keep many rural communities afloat. Diego says that support should be repaid.
Mexico depends on the people sending money to Mexico for their economy. So that's good for the Mexico country. And I don't think it's fair that when people got deported, they come over here and they don't have any help.
The government hopes that the English-speaking deportees will eventually assimilate and boost the Mexican workforce. But for now, there's just tears and uncertainty for those arriving. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Mexico City.
The world's largest exporter of beef is under scrutiny. Now the Brazilian government is in damage control.
The federal government wants to reiterate its confidence in the quality of our national product. I should note that starting tomorrow, the Agriculture Ministry will inform which countries received these products, what these products were, and their origin, company by company.
President Michel Temer has been holding an emergency meeting with global business executives and diplomats. He's trying to limit the fallout from a scandal threatening Brazil's $12 billion a year export. On Friday, police raided meatpacking companies accused of bribing inspectors to ignore unsanitary practices and allow the sale of tainted meat. More than 30 warrants were issued. The country's two largest plants, JBS and BRF, both dispute the allegations. Brazilians are now questioning whether their food is okay to eat.
You see, we're struggling. We pay our taxes, and why? To consume rotten products? It's awful. The authorities should take measures. It's what we expect.
I won't eat any of it. I haven't bought any, and I won't buy any more until the problem is resolved.
More than 150 countries import Brazilian meat. China and the European Union are the biggest buyers. The scandal has left people at home and around the world with a bad taste in their mouth. Whitney Hurst, Al Jazeera.
Should abortions be approved if the baby is the, quote, wrong sex? According to Breitbart, that's what one British medical ethicist is advocating for. Professor Wendy Savage, a member of the Ethics Committee of the British Medical Association, thinks women should have easy access to abortions at any stage of pregnancy. She reportedly recently signed a letter claiming sex-selective abortion is not gender discrimination because that only applies to living people. If a woman does not want to have a fetus who is one sex or the other, forcing her to go through with the pregnancy is not going to be good for the eventual child, says Savage.
A man has been detained by the Secret Service near the White House grounds, according to NBC News. As the man was driving up to a checkpoint, he said he had a bomb in his car. The suspect had claimed to have a bomb in the trunk of a stolen Chevrolet Impala while he was clasping something in his right hand. According to White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer, the incident had occurred just hours after another person had been apprehended for jumping over a bike rack outside the White House fence on Pennsylvania Avenue.
Unusually warm water in the Pacific Ocean has unleashed the deadliest downpours for decades in Peru. 500,000 people are affected by flooding. Tens of thousands are homeless, and at least 150,000 homes have been damaged. Surging rivers have destroyed more than 100 bridges. Mudslides have shut down many roads, and farmers are counting the cost of damage to grapes, banana, and mango exports.
It is an unexpected thing, but what can you do about it? We are going to find shelter and security for all the people who are living in those zones.
Rescuers are working around the clock using cables, pulleys, and zip lines. The government has sent in soldiers and police to stop looting.
Everything is flooded. They are looting everything because there is no food, there is no water, there isn't anything.
Peru's finance minister wants to increase this year's budget by nearly $1.5 billion to fund emergency and recovery efforts.
We are, as everyone knows, confronting a serious climatic problem which we cannot prevent. There has not been an incident of this strength along the coast of Peru since 1998.
Peru's interior minister says the emergency is so large there are not enough rescuers to help everyone. And the worst may not be over. Peruvians are being warned to expect another month of flooding. Paul Chadurjian, Al Jazeera.
As the fight to defeat ISIL and take back control of Mosul goes on, Iraq's Prime Minister wants to see and hear for himself where he stands with the new US president. Haidar al-Abadi announced last week the battle was in its final stages. Now he's wanting to hear Donald Trump's views on a range of issues, not least Trump's suggestion the US should have taken control of Iraq's oil to cut off ISIL's funds.
If we kept the oil, you probably wouldn't have ISIS because that's where they made their money in the first place. So we should have kept the oil. But, okay. Maybe you'll have another chance. But the fact is, you should have kept the oil.
While some of the offence caused to Abadi may have been diffused with diplomacy, there's also the damage caused by the inclusion of his country on Trump's first travel ban executive order. Iraq was later taken off the list, but Trump really does need to appease his guest. And aside from the fight against ISIL, the US wants to reduce Iran's influence on Iraq.
The new administration is worried of Iranian role in Iraq and in the region, generally speaking. And I think they will try also to use this occasion to send a message to the Iraqi Prime Minister, pleasing the Saudis in a way that, you know, this is the concern of the region. You have, as the Prime Minister of Iraq, to take care of the concern of your neighbors.
US military involvement in Iraq dates back more than a quarter of a century with the first Gulf War. Much of Monday's meeting will be about restoring trust. But there's little doubt that Iraq's Prime Minister needs to have strong US support to try to protect his domestic political position. Andrew Simmons, Al Jazeera.
For the first time, former residents of occupied East Jerusalem will be able to return home because of a new ruling by Israel's High Court. The case was brought by a 58-year-old Palestinian man who was born in occupied East Jerusalem. He had lost his residency rights because of an Israeli law that strips Palestinians of those rights if they live outside of the city for more than 7 years. The court ruled he was eligible for a residence permit even though he had lived outside the city for more than a decade. Lawyers who have followed the case say justice has been served.
It is an important decision. It can help many people that their permit was taken to come back to Israel, to stay for a year and to renew their permit and to live in Jerusalem. It's very important for Jerusalemites.
According to official figures, some 14,000 people will now be able to return back to occupied East Jerusalem. But for locals here, the news has been met with some disbelief.
We normally see the court align itself with the Israeli government. I can't explain this decision. I can't believe the High Court made such a decision. It's amazing news.
The fate of Jerusalem is a long-running flashpoint in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Palestinian communities in occupied East Jerusalem are at the forefront of what has been described as a policy of the Judaization of Jerusalem at the expense of other religious communities through settlement expansion and home demolitions. The court's decision is likely to cause alarm among some Israelis who want Jerusalem to be more Jewish than Palestinian. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, occupied East Jerusalem.
School children across Japan are learning new drills in preparation for a possible attack. According to CNN, these exercises are intended to prepare children for the scenario of a North Korean missile strike against this country. While Japan has made a concerted diplomatic effort to avoid such an attack, it is not defenseless. The country has use of the Aegis missile defense system, which is aimed at early detection of missile threats. They can also fire interceptors to strike the ballistic missile early in its flight so it can be destroyed when it's near its highest point.
The U.S. Customs and Border Patrol released its guidelines to companies seeking to build the multi-billion-dollar wall that President Trump promised to supporters on the campaign trail. Through the construction of prototypes, CBP will partner with the industry to identify the best means and methods to construct a border wall before making a more substantial investment in construction, the agency said in a statement. The president's budget proposal announced last week included $4 billion to get started with expanding security and building a wall on the U.S.-Mexico border.
According to NBC on Saturday, North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un announced the ground test of a high-thrust rocket engine. State-run media KCNA said that the rocket engine would help the country's plans to launch satellites. In the past, North Korea has conducted nuclear tests and has said it's preparing to test an intercontinental ballistic missile. KCNA said on its website that Kim Jong-un emphasized that the whole world will soon witness what eventful significance the great victory won today carries. According to the state-run media outlet, Kim Jong-un said the test was a success.
It's been decades since a pope has been as candid about Satan himself as Pope Francis is. Rather than referring to the actual devil, Pope Benedict XVI often had used theology in his teachings on evil. In an address to a group of priests at a Vatican workshop meant to bolster the skill set of a good confessor, Francis told priests they should not hesitate to call on a Vatican-trained exorcist should they need one. Pope Francis says that priests should first consult psychiatric specialists, but should not rule out exorcism as a form of treatment.
Syrian rebels launched a major offensive on Sunday that brought them close to the heart of the old city of Damascus, and government forces responded with intense bombardments of rebel-held areas. The escalation was reported by witnesses, state TV, rebel sources, and a monitoring group, marked a bid by the rebels to relieve army pressure on besieged areas they control to the east of the capital. Moderate Free Syrian Army and jihadist groups were both involved in the assault on the districts of Jobar and Abbasiyan, some 1.2 miles east of the old city walls.
The United Nations says the world's currently facing the largest humanitarian crisis since the end of World War II, and yet you're cutting funding to the UN, funding to the foreign aid budget. Are you worried that some of the most vulnerable people on Earth will suffer as a result?
No, we're absolutely reducing funding to the UN and to the various foreign aid programs, including those run by the UN and other agencies. That should come as a surprise to no one who watched the campaign. The president said specifically, hundreds of times, you covered him, I'm going to spend less money on people overseas and more money on people back home. And that's exactly what we're doing with this budget.
A small wildfire in the mountains just outside downtown Boulder, Colorado, forced people from their homes early Sunday and ignited dead trees that exploded into black plumes of smoke, authorities and residents said. Wind was pushing the flames in the wooded area a couple miles west of Pearl Street, the shopping and dining heart of the city's downtown. Seth Frankel, who has been warned that he and his family may need to evacuate, said he had packed up generations of things that can't be replaced and was ready to go if the air quality got worse.